difference between Comstock and Fitzroy's, how you spell their name, and I just almost threw the controller at the screen. I was like, no, you dumb fucking nitwit. Aside from that being a completely different collection of vowels and consonants, apparently you don't understand the English language at all. You know, like, what a dumb line that is. You know, as much as... And this is the shit that annoys me, is like... It seems so dumb to just kind of go, well, this game got 10 out of 10, and this game only got 7 out of 10. But I mean, like, how many dumb videos have I seen of, like, lines in Metal Gears where people went, man, that's kind of funny, and there's, like, you know, all of this, like, meme culture about, you know, like, a certain X line in Metal Gear being really dumb, and I just kind of go, and people will take that line in BioShock, probably, and, like, hold it up as, like, their political philosophy, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding? You know, like... And like, let's put it this way: Ken Vallone, like, as problematic as Hideo Kojima is a figure in terms of like how video games are political, at least in relation to how his games portray women, which is hugely problematic, obviously. And I've actually written about that before, but I certainly haven't updated it, mostly because I think I want to play the rest of MGS5 before I respond to it. But like, I don't think I've ever seen Hideo Kojima be interviewed about politics. You know, like, and, you know...
Yeah. No, this is really interesting, because, again, holy shit, like, I don't want to go back, but again, it's like, first of all, why? And second of all, oh shit, is this again, I don't want to bring it up again, this is again going back to Austin's thesis.
Well, I mean, this is why I became a game critic, is because I just eventually realized I have way too much to say to not actually be saying it. You know, and that's the thing, is I just kind of came back to it, and I realized, at some point about 2 or 3 years ago, I realized, oh my god, Hideo Kojima is an anarchist. Hideo Kojima is a socialist, and this is what his games are about.
Oh,
you know,
shit.
You know, like... Like, I mean, you know, Metal Gear Solid 4 is about the military-industrial complex, and Metal Gear Solid 2 was calling out SOPA 11 years in advance, you know, and that sort of thing, you know, and I'm just like, you know, I got to a point where I said he's the greatest speculative science fiction writer of our time, you know, like, you know, it's just like, I realize it's like a hero worship thing, and it's just like...
That's actually kind of interesting. There's something that I heard recently about like an interview that Kojima did for Metal Gear Solid 2,
Mm-hmm.
and like the whole idea behind like, you know, Arsenal gear and like controlling the World Wide Web through like censorship and stuff like that was actually an idea that was inspired by Napster.
Right, yeah, that's actually something that gets brought up, because that's like, I mean, when we talk about SOPA goes back to Napster, you know, like... That's exactly all that this is. It's basically the film industry going, we don't want to be the music industry because we saw what happened in the music industry. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and I just kind of go, I mean, it's just like we have a man whose work has political insight, and we're not talking to him about it. You know?
Yeah.
I just have to say, and the thing is, we don't realize it because he's painting it as a spy thriller. And the dumb thing about that is that should make it a lot more tolerable to us. Like, there was a period in my life, if we were talking about left of capitalism, like, I mean, if we were talking about socialism or communism, I didn't want to hear it. But, like, I was still playing, like, in that period of time, I was playing Hideo Kojima's games, and, like, playing Hideo Kojima's games and realizing that that's what they were about made it make sense to me. That's the power of these kind of things.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
So I mean, look, you know what? I want to press you on that a bit, because I've always had trouble with Kojima's stuff. When I watch a lot of these games, and sometimes when I guess play a bit of them, I see. I'm not going to call it pretensions, because that seems kind of dismissive, but I see a lot of weird quirks in the writing that just feel very bloated. This is just the way I feel, because you say a lot of this stuff, and these are things I tend to see a lot when I go through them. I tend to see a lot of writing that feels very bloated, lots of like huge general questions that never seem to go anywhere. This is what I tend to personally sort of see in Kojima's work. So I'm interested in what you're saying, mostly because I've had some trouble kind of like getting this myself.
Honestly, I would say that in his later work, especially, I would definitely say that his writing has gotten
MGS 3 and 4.
Like, his writing is definitely not as doesn't work as well as it did before. Especially when it comes to like the thing about Metal Gear Solid 2 is that even though like the ending was really like up in your face, like, okay, this is actually what this game is about. Like, it was still leading you up to something. Whereas Metal Gear Solid 5 has absolutely no nuance as to what it's doing, and then that leads into, like, the scene with like Pause and the bombs and that whole thing with the operation and the violence and all that stuff, like like especially when it comes to like Metal Gear Solid 3, like you knew Volgin was a bad dude, but you never had to know exactly what he did to people to know that he was a bad person. Like a lot of Volgin's like villainy was implied in such a way that you wouldn't even have to explicitly go, oh, well, he did this horrible thing, so therefore he's bad. Whereas the new villain, Skullface, or whatever the fuck in Metal Gear Solid 5, there is no nuance whatsoever. They just go straight into it, and it's just like, what are you doing? Like, you know? It's ridiculous.
I guess to Austin, like I'm interested. Do you ever notice those things? Like, am I the only one who feels this way? That it's really hard for me to get something out of these works. They just feel like those. Do you understand when I have those concerns about Metal Gear as a general?
Here's the thing. I have a lot of broad thoughts on this, especially when it comes to about how the Metal Gear Solid series is misogynistic, because the thing about it is that a lot of things are misogynistic, and they're misogynistic because their creators are misogynistic, and they don't realize it, and they don't realize that their works are. The Metal Gear Solid games are misogynistic for a reason. And and I don't want to say it's because Hideo Kojima like explicitly hates women with every part of his soul. But the thing about it is that I wrote an article about this, and the thing is that Hideo Kojima is using women in his games in a way that is supposed to thematically contribute to what he's trying to say. This is especially true in like basically the argument that I made is that MGS1 and MGS2 are both kind of pointing at the artifice of a video game and saying like this is the way things are because it's a video game. And the way he does that with women is by basically like he'll take characters who by any stretch of the imagination have, for example, agency and value and a lot of their own interesting characteristics, who are then damselized and that sort of thing because they are women in video games. Or at least that's what I think he's trying to say with it, as opposed to just because honestly, if you don't take it as part of that, then like it just kind of seems out of place considering all of the other stuff he's doing, which clearly
I'm not sure if he succeeds.
The thing about
that's complete. It's still misogynistic. It is. Yeah, it is still misogynistic. Because it's just like he has so many other ways of pointing out that that artifice of video games and like talking about that. And there are more effective ways he could have done it with women as well. But and I think actually the way he kind of did it with Ava and the boss in MGS3 was broadly more effective. Okay, going back to the initial, because we got into really loaded territory, but going back to your initial question of like bloat and stuff, I kind of brought up that women thing because the thing about it is that Hideo Kojima intentionally restricts himself to genre convention because that's what the Metal Gear games are kind of about. That's partially what the Metal Gear games are about as well. In the first two Metal Gear games and definitely Metal Gear Solid 4 and partially Metal Gear Solid 3 are all some of the original games about games. They are.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, especially when it comes to Metal Gear Solid 2.
Yeah, Metal Gear Solid 2. Solid 2,
and even like 1, I would definitely say is one of those games where it's like it's aware that it's a game, but it's like also it's more than that.
Yeah, like MGS2 is the game about the game. And I think the thing that's always been valuable about Kojima's work, just on a random note, is that his work has always been game about game, but then it's also been about other stuff that he like kind of more or less intelligently weaves in there. Whereas a game like, for example, BioShock is the original BioShock does that in a much less successful way. It not only reduces the amount of video games that it's talking about, but it also reduces the political message of it to like something much simpler. But anyway, so the thing about it is like, for example, it's like when people bring up like Rose and her voice acting, for example, in MGS2, I kind of find it hard not to go that he's kind of, he's bringing in an element of like romantic melodrama or whatever, because if nothing else, aesthetically, it's supposed to fuck with your expectations of this genre, because that's the entirety of what Metal Gear Solid 2 is about. It's about fucking with your genre expectations,
Okay,
In other,
it's also like it's just this thing where do you think that the Metal Gear Solid games are kind of aware that sometimes they're sort of, I don't want to say it seems to say exaggerated, but they're kind of
they're campy.
yeah, they're campy. Yeah,
They
they're really
they
campy.
they use camp intentionally, and Super Bunny Hop he did videos about Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3, and in 3 he made the point that MGS3 it will use its camp, and the idea, at least in part, is that it's being campy, and therefore like when basically it's campy up until a point, and then when it stops being campy and goes for like true drama, then like the actual dramatic parts come off more effectively, which seems like something he's forgotten in MGS5 thus far. And that's something that I would say has been broadly that was definitely broadly effective in MGS3 and MGS2 and MGS1. Like, if nothing else, at least especially based on what we were expecting dramatically out of video games at the time, there was just this kind of whole thing where like, oh, I'm like a secret agent in this base, and I'm like, oh wait, my friend is dying. Like, and it's just like, that's kind of like a lot of like the Metal Gear games kind of rely on that kind of push pull between like the fun that you're having playing the video game, and then kind of that realization that, oh wait, this shit has consequences. Like in MGS1 we have in MGS1 we have like Meryl's getting captured by the enemy, and in depending on which ending you get killed. And the same thing with Gray Fox. It's just like oh wait, these stories have like death tolls, because a lot of Hideo Kojima's work, and I think that's also a huge problem of like about how he depicts violence against women, is that he's willing to depict violence against women as just another part of the casualties of and the collateral damage of war, because that's most of what his work is about.
Okay.
Like if there's a big center idea between all of Hideo Kojima's work, it's pacifism. He hates war. He hates conflict, etc., etc. And not in a way that he wants people to depoliticize about it, because a lot of his perspective on it is distinctly radical leftist. But
It's just like I mean let's assume that I'm going to assume that a lot of your arguments here that you're putting in that you're drawing, that you have examples and getting them to draw from the text. I'm going to say, okay, let's say Austin's right about all this stuff, then it's like this shit just like this is like socialist commentary and like Metal Gear that just like these are like huge franchise series. And this shit just like I guess flies.
I guess because it's because it's and I think this is actually true of a lot of Japanese games, is that it's really strongly subtextual. Like, for example, like, do you remember like when I was talking earlier about maybe you weren't there, I think TJ you were there. You remember how I was talking about like how, for example, the mechanics of Dragon Quest being so grind heavy but always rewarding that grind as kind of reinforcing conservative notions of economy, that like basically if you always work hard, you're always going to get rewarded.
We were talking about that between like Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy earlier.
Yeah, and Final Fantasy has a strong lack of has much less of that, especially in the later games, where it's basically just kind of like, as long as you fight the stuff that comes along your way, you'll be okay. As opposed to like being something you have to work at. But
yeah, exactly.
But so basically the thing about it is that the text.
You're gonna have to incline this to a conclusion in the next like 6 minutes.
Right. But basically, what I'll say is that the context, or rather, or what. There's subtext and then there's something else. I usually refer to it as context. Sometimes I call it supertext. I don't know. The context of Metal Gear Solid has never been even overtly political. Except for the fact that it's been anti-nuke and anti-war. But the actual subtext of the Metal Gear Solid series is essentially it's critical of capitalism, it's critical of nationalism and that sort of thing. Like, for example, like if you're playing MGS3 and you're viewing it straightforwardly, then it's kind of then it is definitely pacifistic, and it calls for it calls for peace between the East and the West, but it also it also strongly in the subtext suggests the idea that there should not be a East or a West. Exactly. So basically all I'm saying is that most of this stuff just kind of exists under the surface, and it just has to be like, and the thing about it is like, you know, I've spent 10 years. I spent 10 years with these games. You know, like I Metal Gear Solid 2 was the first game I bought with my own money. I've probably played it upwards of 20 times. You know, and so it's just maybe I see this thing, maybe I see these things more easily, and it's also just I think it's also just because like the artifice of, or rather the